Have you ever been on a mission to get something accomplished, but then you're interrupted suddenly? Is it important to stick around for that thing that's interrupted you or not? Perhaps sticking around could change somebody's life and set up the thing later to be even greater. Hello and welcome to the Midweek Move, podcast extension of the Healing Place, the podcast where we examine the scriptures line by line, verse by verse, and ask ourselves what is happening here. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I am joined at the very bright table, Pastor Scott. How you doing?
Bright table, bright lighting. I'm doing good. And thank you guys for welcoming us to wherever you are today. It's going to be a really good time today. Really interesting moments that we're going to see that Jesus has and how he responds to these really important moments, yet seemingly day-to-day. We can see it in our day-to-day mundane lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So
absolutely. Good. And I want to encourage you guys, again, as we go through this, I want to remind you, we're dealing a story that maybe you've heard preached several times, but I need you to keep the context in mind. We're picking up right after where Jesus left the healing of demonic, which happened right after Jesus calmed a storm where his disciples were literally just freaking out, which happened right after Jesus had spent some time teaching to a multitude of people on a boat. This is not just a one-off story that we're just throwing out there. This is a continuing moment over a couple of days that Jesus is having here. And again, that span's going to make sense for you guys here in a little bit. But Pastor, let's jump into it. Verse 21 through 24.
Yeah, because they have crossed over the quote-unquote sea, more like a lake.
Right.
They've crossed over. They've just left an unbelievable time of teaching with one crowd, the storm. Then now they've encountered the demonic, and Jesus dealing with that. And then Jesus dealing with being rejected by a whole entire group of people, now coming back over to the other side. So, like, the up and down of the last few days is just crazy in what the disciples are watching and seeing. Verse 21 of Mark 5. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, and I'm glad they said again, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed and she will live. So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him.
Okay, so Mark continues the narrative from our last reading by showing Jesus crossing the waters to the other side. A large crowd once again greets Jesus. They see him, they just surround him. And Jairus is a community leader, and he comes up to Jesus. Now, Jairus likely was after I studied this, I didn't realize what this meant really, but he was probably just a wealthy gentleman that kind of took on administrative roles at the local synagogue temple. And so it wasn't necessarily, because when I read this years ago, I thought he was a ruler of the synagogue meant he was a priest or a rabbi. No, he was more like a really active deacon, if you will, or elder in the church. And so, but he was a man who had some sort of authority in the community. Now, some scholars believe that this may have actually been the synagogue where Jesus was administered back in chapter 1 on top of that. So Jairus potentially had quite a bit of experience with Jesus on the front end of things. My question for you, Pastor, why is it a big deal that the leader of the community is coming to Jesus in what many would say is a very desperate manner?
Yeah, well, probably multi-layered. Number one, it's a big deal because he recognizes that there is something in Jesus that can help his daughter, which means that he's probably witnessed something before this time.
Right.
So whether that be a miracle, whether it be healing, whether he's heard of it, in some way, he believes that Jesus can bring healing to his daughter. Secondly, a man of this stature to be this desperate, to fall at his feet, to run to Jesus and to beg him earnestly, that would be a show of weakness within the community. That would have been looked down upon. That would have been frowned upon. It would have been kind of equal to the father in the story of the prodigal running to his son and falling upon him.
Right.
You know, a man of that stature, you know, number one, did not run.
Right.
That wasn't dignified.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if that meant they power walked or whatever, but we do know that historically that to run and to beg would be dishonoring to this type of individual.
Right.
And it would be disrespectful, and people would definitely frown upon this. So he really is laying aside his titles and who he is and not caring what anybody thinks
Right.
to get to Jesus and to make this big ask
Right.
of Jesus.
Yeah, we definitely see the desperation of this man within those actions alone. I think that today we see any man doing some stuff where like, man, they're desperate. There is a stoicness of even the modern man of like, well, we don't do certain things. But when your child is potentially on their deathbed, there is something that a father goes, I need to get help now.
Yep.
All right. Let's continue on, Pastor, 25 through 28.
Now, a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well.
Okay. So while on his way to help Jairus and his daughter, a woman who seems to have some sort of hemorrhage for 12 straight years enters the picture. Several scholars point out that the woman seemed to have a very Hellenistic belief that the healing powers could be transferred through items. They also point out that Jesus' initial response, and I found this interesting as I was reading about it, it wasn't a, hey, that's terrible doctrine. You know, you're operating something that's not biblical, but it was, he's worried about the woman it's herself. He's going to put aside some of the stuff because he sees there's pain and suffering right now in this moment. My question for you, Pastor, this woman seems to be just as desperate as Jairus is for the healing. We see the turmoil of having been bleeding for 12 years, the fact that she is basically destitute because she's been seeing doctors for 12 years. But what about this interaction specifically where she's sneaking through crowds highlights her desperation?
Leviticus 15:33, customary impurity, do not touch. Isaiah chapter 52, verse 11, touch no unclean thing. She's unclean.
Yeah.
She has a hemorrhage of blood. When Leviticus 15 talks about customary impurity, it's speaking of a woman and her cycle and her time. This woman has had that for 12 years consistently. So she, according to the community and the people, she is unclean. Absolutely unclean.
Right.
Not for a season, but consistently, which means that her public life had to change 12 years ago.
Right.
Her relationships had to change 12 years ago. And now for 12 years, not only has she been seeing a doctor, not only has she spent everything that she has, not only is she destitute, but quite honestly, if everybody in her circle is following the law, she has no friends.
Right.
She's been cast out of her family. And she's not supposed to be in this crowd.
Right.
Specifically touching anybody.
Right.
Much less a rabbi. Much less a rabbi. And again, the fact that she's pressing through the crowd, not only does it highlight her desperation, but it also puts this thing out as, if I can get to him, I can be healed. If not, I'm willing to sacrifice my life. That's the type of desperation, because she would have been stoned, killed, murdered.
Exactly.
In public. It would have happened very publicly.
Right.
As to set an example to the rest of the unclean people, whether it be a leper, whether it be a woman, whether it be a man. You know, in Leviticus 15, it talks about a discharge, a man. And so there were a lot of things in the law that she's breaking through just to touch Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're spending a little time on this because I need you guys to, again, see the desperation of these two people. Jairus is giving up his title, he's giving up his position in life, and he's seeking Jesus for help for his daughter. This woman is literally risking her life to try to get healing. These are desperate people. They are broken in this moment.
She's breaking most every law that she's been taught her whole entire life to obey. Like,
absolutely. All right, Pastor, 29 through 34.
Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction."
So here we see this amazing scene take place. Jesus senses something has happened. Now his disciples make note, and I read this in it's like a very humorous way. He's like, "Who touched me?" And they're like, "Who touched you?" Like, we're in a crowd. Who do you think touched you? Everyone is touching you.
It's like Secret Service is like, "What are you talking about?"
Like, everyone's here touching you, Jesus, right? So there's this whole thing about, who's touched him. But Jesus is focusing on one person who was made whole. After the woman bravely comes forward, he reassures her in a loving way that what made her whole was not touching his robe. It wasn't touching him, which again, this goes to the whole aspect of this, why this belief wasn't really a biblical one. Everyone's touching him. Why isn't everybody getting healed in that moment? Because it was
not everybody had the faith to be healed.
Exactly. It was her faith in him that made her whole. The word whole here is one that we're familiar here with, called sozo, a word that means healing beyond just physical needs. There's a lot taking place in this moment. Jesus is talking about her bleeding. He's talking about a deeper aspect of her being made whole. Yep. As a part of this moment, Jesus is intentional about calling her daughter. And you've taught on this many times. Why is this aspect of him calling her daughter such a big deal?
Well, for 12 years, she has been known for her issue. She's the woman with the issue of blood.
Yeah.
She's lost her identity in who she really is over these 12 years. She's no longer really a person. She's a pariah. She's an outsider.
Yeah.
She's unclean. Her humanity has been stripped from her.
Yeah.
Jesus now not only dealing with the physical aspect of her, but this word daughter now speaks to the soul part of her soul. Because when you're struggling physically, you do struggle emotionally.
Yeah.
It manifests itself. When you struggle emotionally, it manifests itself physically. And so this sozo that Jesus is bringing to her is a physical, emotional, and spiritual healing. And now, as the Son of God, he speaks daughter. That's identity.
Yeah.
You're healed fully, not just of the blood, but you're healed of the hurt,
the
pain, the being cast out, the offense, the bitterness of being alone, the bitterness of being isolated, the torment of being isolated. You've been healed. He didn't say, "Hey, woman with the issue of blood." She didn't have an issue of blood anymore.
Right.
But this wording of daughter now brings her back into a place of absolute welcoming, not just back into culture, but a spiritual welcoming in to a family that's much bigger than a cultural family.
Yeah. It's that whole restoration of identity that we've talked about many times, that it's a changing point for people.
Yep.
Again, there's a lot of people today. Some of you guys listening, you're walking in the identity of somebody who had an addiction. Maybe you've been free from that, but you still carry that goes like, well, I was an addict. And I get why organizations like AA and everything like that, they're like, well, once an addict, always an addict. And there's a level of put up guardrails to protect yourself, but you are not the addict. You are, your name. And that's important for us, that we need to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, I'm not a cocaine addict who's better.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a new life in Christ Jesus. I'm a new creation in Christ Jesus.
Exactly.
The old things have passed away.
Right.
And so, again, I'm not an addict.
Yeah.
I'm not addicted to this, or this. I'm a child of God.
Right.
I'm a son of the living God.
Exactly. And I'll throw this out because it's easy for us to go to things like addict and talk about things that people have done, but things have done to you. Some of you are walking, you're like, well, I'm a victim. You don't have to be anymore.
That's right.
You know, you're not a victim. Something happened to you. It was terrible.
You were victimized.
Right.
But you don't have to live as a victim.
Right.
And I know that our immediate response in our flesh is, well, you don't know, and you don't know, and we don't know.
Yeah.
But we do know being victimized.
Yeah.
We do know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
We have experienced that
Mm-hmm.
of being victimized, but we refuse to walk as a victim. We refuse to give the enemy that kind of power in our life. And when we say enemy, we're not talking about a person. We're talking about the devil who has come to steal, kill, and destroy.
Exactly.
And that's what Jesus is dealing with. Like he is tearing down everything the enemy has tried to do in this whole entire region.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus is breaking it all down through teaching, through compassion, through physical touch,
Mm-hmm.
through casting demons out. Like he's doing it in so many different ways. Speaking peace. He took authority even over nature because the enemy was trying to use it to strike fear into the disciples so they wouldn't believe in Jesus.
Right.
And so from this side to that side to that side, he's literally tearing down every single work of the devil, which again, 1 John says it, why was he manifested? To destroy the works of the devil.
Absolutely.
And that's what Jesus is doing through every single part of this.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Well, let's continue on, Pastor.
While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James.
Okay, so here we see something tragic. In the time of leaving his home to fetch Jesus and return, Jairus' daughter has passed away. His servants show respect for Jesus by calling him teacher or master, depending on your translation. But Jesus turns to the man and tells him not to fear, only believe, presumably in him. As a father, Pastor, what would you suspect Jairus' mindset would be in this moment? And I'm asking this question because, again, I want to humanize this passage. We read these things, we hear them preached, and some of you guys, you're jumping already to the end of the passage because you've read it so many times. But I really want us to be in this moment. And what do you think the mindset of this man would have been in this moment?
From desperation to defeat. It's over.
Yeah.
Like I was desperate. And quite honestly, I might even be mad that the woman interrupted it.
Yeah.
Which means that I would turn my attention towards the woman with the issue of blood rather than daughter. So I wouldn't even see her healing as valid.
Right.
Because it kept something from me.
Mm.
And we lean towards that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important for us to never allow those things to cloud what God is really trying to do, because then we'll miss what God is trying to do.
Yeah.
Like there's a greater purpose happening in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Lord is doing all of it. But as a father, man, you go from this place of desperation and humiliation.
Yeah.
He humiliated himself in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Jesus is on his way, interrupted, daughter's dead, total defeat.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Right.
I'm done. Kill me.
Mm-hmm.
Take me out
Yeah.
now. And quite honestly, probably anger toward Jesus.
Yeah. Absolutely. Again, I'm asking him to give us this information because I want us to be in this moment. Really put yourself here as we walk through the next few moments with Jairus and Jesus. Pastor, you can read 38 through 40.
And by the way, in verse 37, for those of us that are like, Jesus doesn't pick favorites, and he doesn't take all 12 with him.
That's true.
Peter, James, and John. That's it.
Yep.
Why? Well, we're not sure exactly why, but we do know that Jesus allowed those three to be a part of really impactful moments that the other 9 did not get to be a part of. And I think that the next verses give us an indication of why these 3 were chosen to go to this. Verse 38. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. And by the way, this wasn't an oddity here. This was
culture.
Yeah, this was culture. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying.
Okay, so this is an interesting moment. Jesus walks in the room with professional mourners, and it has been said that the poorest of Jews at any time would not go without at least hiring 2 flute players and a wailing woman for the funeral of a loved one. It's like we said, it's culture. That would have professional people there to mourn your family and make almost a spectacle out of things.
And not just for a moment, but for days.
Yeah.
For days.
Yeah. So when Jesus declares that the girl is not dead but sleeping, they laugh and mock him. Now, I found this interesting that how those who stand to gain from the girl's death are the ones mocking the possibility that she's not dead. I'm not making a doctrine out of that, but I do find that interesting. My question for you, though, Pastor, is looking at the situation, why did Jesus clear the room? And I'm asking because you had a moment where you had to do something similar years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think he cleared the room for a lack of faith.
Mm-hmm.
We see Jesus do that with was it Peter's mother-in-law?
Yeah.
When everybody was removed from the room.
Mm-hmm.
We see that even the disciples do the same thing
Mm-hmm.
After the ascension of Jesus. And so clearing the room of everything that is not of God.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these people don't want to have the faith to believe this miracle because they're getting paid for this person to be dead.
Right.
If they're alive, then and professional mourners in those days, it wasn't just about what they could get, but they would be seen.
Mm-hmm.
They would be recognized. They would receive attention.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to say this, and I don't want to say this in a bad way. That's not even the right wording. I don't want to say this in a demeaning way. But we have the same thing today.
Yeah.
You can see the same thing at a funeral where people, whether they are truly under duress or not, make a spectacle of themselves at a funeral. Now, I'm not talking about the immediate family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about mourners who come. And they begin to make it all about themselves rather than the family. They begin to make it about them. They want people to see them mourn. They want people to see them. And as a minister, a lot of times I'm tasked to look out for those people.
Yeah.
And I'm tasked by the family to keep those people at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I've even been asked where somebody who's not the family would go up to the casket and lay all over the casket and lay all over the person and just make a spectacle. I've been asked by a family member, go up there and get them away from my loved one right now. And I've had to do that. And it's like, clear the room. I've had to do it in a hospital situation where the person in the hospital, the family said, look, get these people out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't have any faith for my healing.
Right.
Get them out of here. My first inclination was, well, they're kind of sort of your family. Can you get them out of here? It was like, I was asked to do that. And so I did it.
Right.
It wasn't looked at as a good thing, but I did it because I was asked to do it. And I believed it to be true.
Yeah.
And looking back now, it was true.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to demean those that were outside that room. They just weren't in a place in that moment to believe for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get that.
Yeah.
Maybe I haven't been either, and there've been rooms that quite honestly, I haven't gone into because I just wasn't there.
Right.
And so, again, if you're listening to this and you're a leader, I would say you're not supposed to be in every room.
Mm.
Again, this is not getting too far away from this, but it's not all about you.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question to a family when something really hardcore is going down, it has to do with a hospital room or something like that, is, okay, like, do you need me there?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe me being there is of value
Right.
to you? Because I don't want to presuppose that just because I'm the pastor, I need to be in that room.
Right.
And I say that because there was an instance where there was a pastor in a room with me when we were dealing with something personally, and they didn't need to be in that room.
Yeah.
And that was a source of anger for me in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
True anger.
Yeah.
Not righteous anger.
Mm-hmm.
True anger. And it was a lesson to me, though, as a pastor, that I shouldn't be in every room.
Yeah.
I need to let those people know that I'm available
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm there for them and I'm praying for them. And if they need me there, I'll be there.
Right.
But I don't need to be in that room. And Jesus saw who needed to be in the room, who didn't need to be in the room. And that's why he cleared the room.
Yeah. And I'm going to add on to, remember, he only brought 3 of his disciples into the room.
So 9 of his own
Right.
didn't need to be in the room.
Yeah.
So he wasn't telling these people to do something that he wasn't adhering to himself.
Right. Exactly. And again, it's not necessarily a disparaging when you ask people, hey, step out. Again, his disciples are his disciples. They're rocking with him. But in that moment, he needed just these 3 guys with him.
Yep.
So cool. All right, let's continue on. 41 through 43.
Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha kumai, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat.
Cool. All right. So first, I'm going to point out the fact this is the second time where he's healed somebody. He says, hey, make a sandwich. Found that interesting. But here we see yet another miraculous moment. Jesus takes the dead girl by the hand, commands her to wake up. Now, it's interesting that Mark first presents the Aramaic form of what Jesus says and translates it out. This is not to suggest that there's magic in the Aramaic words, but Mark likely included as a type of dramatic effect for his original Greek audience who was reading this passage. The young lady, of course, rises from the dead, and Jesus, again, attempts to preserve his messianic message by telling them to keep things quiet. And then, like I said, tells her, go and eat, have a sandwich. A couple questions for you, Pastor. First off, as a father, going back to this moment, again, I want to humanize this moment for us. What would be going through your mind to see this kind of thing take place?
I think for me, I would probably be sitting in the corner, just unable to even function.
Yeah.
Because you've gone from desperation and humiliation, public humiliation, to total defeat, to now what you hoped would happen, but maybe didn't believe would really happen, has now happened.
Yeah.
I don't think that anybody would be like, oh, yeah, great. This is the way it's supposed to be. Let's eat.
Yeah.
Like, I think Jairus is probably just in a corner, just folded up.
Yeah.
Just like, what just happened to me in this sequence of events? And if I have been mad at the woman with the issue, how do I deal with that now?
Yeah.
If I was mad that she got healed, now what do I do with that? Do I go back to her? You know, like, and again, that's why Dallas and I, a lot of times we really want to break this down into like our humanity, man. There's a lot of stuff happening just in the humanity of this moment.
Yeah.
Emotionally and spiritually and physically, like all of it is activated.
Right.
And it's very real and it's very unpredictable and it's very unexpected and it's very humbling and very embarrassing. Like all of that's happening. Now, ultimately, it's going to be like, yay, yes. But man, I can't imagine him just being like, oh, yeah, that was great. Like, yeah.
It's a Tuesday, you know?
Yeah, right.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, cool. All right, so next thing for you, Pastor. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen a series of spectacular miracles. We've seen Jesus his command over nature, his command over the demonic, the command over the body, and finally the command over the spirit of the young girl to come to life. At the same time, it's interesting to note that 3 of those miraculous moments put Jesus in a situation where he was ceremonially basically shamed and made unclean. What does it say about the mission of Jesus that he's willing to walk through these moments? Because again, he's in a Gentile country dealing with a demonic man. surrounded by pigs, and then he's dealing with an unclean woman, and he's touching a dead human being. So what does it say about his mission that he's willing to walk through these moments of being ceremonially unclean and shamed?
Going back to the beginning of this, I just believe that he's modeling what he's going to do on the cross,
Mm-hmm.
which he is ultimately going to step into all of our humanity, our uncleanness,
Mm-hmm.
and make us clean.
Yeah.
And that our cleanliness would not be represented by a day, the Sabbath day, or the law,
Mm-hmm.
or any of these other things, but that it would be through his blood. And so the things that we see Jesus doing are all modeling what he will ultimately do on the cross and through his resurrection, which is to touch our humanity, get into our humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and bring healing and restoration and reconciliation to the Father through the very unclean nature of a crucifixion on a cross through his blood.
Right.
That he would take on our uncleanliness and then give us robes of righteousness to make us clean. I believe Jesus is just modeling those things out.
Awesome. Good.
It wasn't because he was just some super compassionate human,
Right.
but again, he's modeling as the Son of Man what ultimately he will do as the Son of God.
Right. Good stuff. All right, guys. Well, we want to hear from you. How has this encouraged you? How has it challenged you? How can we pray with you? Reach out to us, mediahub@thpshreveport.com. If you want more information about the Healing Place, visit thpshreveport.com. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, have a great week.